about what AOL actually made was worth this much. And Time Warner, which made about this much money, it was kind of worth what it made because it was an old media company. So people think it wasn't going to grow. So Time Warner was, despite making about 10x what AOL did, it was worth about half. And so AOL was like, okay, we'll buy you. And Time Warner should have been like, fuck you. We make way more money than you. We should buy you. You're a scam. But instead they said, oh shit, really? We'd love to be part of the internet. We don't really get it. This is an old clip of them quizzing the CEO on why he would do this deal.
80% of the cash flow of this combined company will come from your company, and yet your shareholders will own only 45%. Why were you willing to sign off on the deal?
Oh, well, pretty clearly, if you looked at last Friday, the market cap of AOL was twice the size of Time Warner. I've made a judgment, which I believe to be correct, that going forward, the Time Warner shareholders will be much better off owning 45% of AOL Time Warner than 100% of Time Warner.
Yeah, he was wrong. He was wrong. So instead of owning all of a big media company, he gave up over half of his company. They definitely knew. He didn't know, because if you want to know what he thinks about this, they actually interviewed. I found an interview with him years later. He said, I'd like to forget it. I almost didn't do this interview because I didn't want to dig it up again. Let it pass into history. This should pass into history like the Vietnam War and the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. It's one of the biggest disasters that have occurred to our country. I lost 80% of my worth and subsequently lost my job. We looked it up to see if I was the biggest loser of all time because I lost about $8 billion personally. That guy in the clip earlier. The second the deal completes, this happens. Let's pull it up and get rid of my black boxes. It goes from this to this. Because this thing called broadband comes out and people don't want to pay by the hour. So all of this AOL stock, by the way, this deal was done with stock. What that means is they bought Time Warner Cable with AOL stock. So everyone at Time Warner just got AOL stock. They didn't get money. The next year, not only did they lose all that money, they had to do a write-down of, drumroll please, $99 billion lost in a single quarter, the highest loss in business history. Everyone involved lost money. Tons of people were fired. It was a massive blow-up, massive disaster, and both companies have been worse ever since. That's the end of the story, except for one thing. But this guy, Scott Ahrens, said, together they're an unprecedented powerhouse. If their mantra is content, this alliance is unbeatable. Now they have this great platform that can cross-fertilize with content. Just buzzwords, just trash buzzwords. The kind of shit people say about Dogecoin and fucking Tesla today. But I was like, you know what? I'm kind of interested. Where is Scott Ahrens now? I saw this article and I was like, this guy was so fucking wrong. I wonder what he's doing now. So I Googled him. I did some little light e-stalking. And I found out he had done an interview with people asking, with PBS. PBS did an expose. They were asking, why the fuck did all these .com stocks crash? Like, how did everyone get so duped? Because he said pets.com was going to the moon. He said theglobe.com was going to the moon. They looked at all of his history, because what analysts do, right, is they recommend to the public if you should buy or sell or hold a stock. And they looked at all of his recommendations. They realized over his entire career, he never ever said to sell. And he told the public to buy. Okay? And they found out he never, ever issued a sell. And PBS started calling him out on it. PBS was like, hey, what you're doing is corrupt. He said, right here, I found this line. They said, you never said you don't like a stock. You only said you liked it. He said, no, that's not true at all. I said I didn't like stocks all the time. And then they said, do you remember an example? And he said, yeah, I said it about Amazon. I was one of the first people to turn negative on Amazon. That was the one example in his whole career of pumping shitty internet stocks of a...
Abusing Wall Street had never been so easy, because tucked away in the back offices of big trading firms, teams of financial hackers had found a tiny loophole in its newly implemented electronic trading systems. One they had been exploiting undetected for years to make billions of dollars in profit. But unfortunately for them, up in Canada, a lowly, frustrated trader couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong with the orders he placed. It was like some invisible force knew exactly what he was about to buy or sell the second before he clicked trade. His clients, like big pension funds, were hemorrhaging money and he needed answers, fast. But Wall Street's elites weren't about to let an outsider blow open their secret. They had already sunken hundreds of millions of dollars into high-speed infrastructure to protect their edge, and to keep it, they were ready to gamble with the entire market. By the late 1990s, Wall Street realized it was falling behind in the technological revolution. So in '98, the Securities and Exchange Commission dropped regulations around what they called alternative trading systems. This opened the door for new digital stock exchanges, but these new electronic exchanges were still years away. None of the stuffy Joes on the trading floors expected to be at home scratching their butts in their underwear buying and selling stocks anytime soon. But then the planes hit, and with physical trading floors closed, manual trading essentially impossible, there was an immediate push to fully electronic trading systems to keep the market running. And they were a huge hit, here to stay. Firms started closing down their old trading floors, instead replacing them for wires and algorithms. But in an era where teenagers were hacking into telecom companies left and right, what could go wrong putting the world's most important financial systems online? Enter Brad Katsuyama. He had risen quickly within the Royal Bank of Canada, starting as an institutional trader specializing in energy and tech stocks. He was so damn good that he eventually ran RBC's entire US equity risk trading operation. No small feat in a world measured by split-second decisions and razor-thin margins. RBC was seen as an outsider on Wall Street, less entrenched than the big US banks. Yet Brad built trust with major institutional clients through this role. He was buying stocks on their behalf, think big hedge funds with tens of millions to spend. Maybe it was just the Canadian niceness in him, but he really seemed like a guy who cared whether they got a fair deal. Then, around 2007, Brad noticed something odd. Orders that seemed straightforward on his screen suddenly vanished or shifted the moment he tried to execute them. Prices moved away as if someone knew exactly what he intended to buy before he could even complete the order. Suspicious, he did what any trader would do.
I do what every trader does when they think their computer's not working. I'd call tech support and the guy would run out of the back and say, "What's going on?" I say, "Watch this. I see 50,000 shares at $2.93. I'm gonna try to buy that. I will only get a fraction of what you and I see on the screen." And I try to do it and I get 15,000 shares. And I say, "What do you think is happening?" And he says, "Well, I think that there's more people that want to buy AMD, and it's not just you, meaning that you're part of a market that's moving very quickly and many people want to trade." And I said, "Okay, well, I'll prove you wrong." I say, I'm going to try to buy 45,000 shares at $2.95, but I'm not going to press this button for 5 seconds. And if while I'm counting the stocks trading, you're right, other people want to buy AMD. I said, but nothing's going to happen until I press this button. So I'd count to 5 or 7 or whatever. I could change it, it doesn't matter. And then I'd hit the button, and that's when the stock would move. That's when the offers would disappear. And I'd say to them, I said, I'm the event. This is not a random occurrence. The only reason people want to buy AMD is because I want to buy it. I had no idea why this was happening. It went on for 2 years.
2 years with no clear answer is crazy for this, because somehow someone was beating him to the punch, abusing the new electronic systems to front run his trades. In financial markets, knowing what your counterparty will buy a moment before they buy it can mean billions in profit. But for Brad, that wasn't so obvious just yet. He was stuck, not much he could do as a trader. Till 2009, when RBC offered him the opportunity to become the global head of electronic sales and trading. Essentially, he would be responsible for overseeing the bank's software developers building their in-house digital trading systems. But he didn't want to take it. He long thought that this division was a hot pile of garbage. It's actually run by a company that RBC had acquired in 2007 that was more or less in shambles, and he had attributed this bug to their dodgy programming. He didn't want to attach his name to that sort of thing, but RBC was persisting. And so before committing, Brad sought some advice from an old friend who was working in this sort of technology at SAC Capital. That's one of the world's largest hedge funds, renowned for its cutting-edge tools and algorithms. To Brad's astonishment, his friend was facing the exact same issue. This wasn't some glitch in RBC's system, it was something bigger, systemic. Someone was gaming the entire market for billions of dollars in profit. That revelation changed everything. Brad accepted the new role. Now as global head of electronic sales and trading, he had both the mandate and the resources to dissect the problem from the inside out. What he would uncover was more unbelievable than he could ever imagine.
I was hiring people in the spring of 2009, and all of a sudden I could convince a bunch of people who never in their wildest dreams ever wanted to work for the Royal Bank of Canada that the Royal Bank of Canada was actually a pretty good place for people to work. So I built a team at RBC.
So Brad, gung-ho in his new role, was set on bringing together a team of all-stars, wanted the brightest minds from Wall Street to figure out what was going on to protect RBC's clients from losing their butts. Small issue, the Royal Bank of Canada isn't exactly known for retaining top-tier financial talent, but luckily for Brad, he was hiring in spring of 2009, just about the lowest point in the jobs market after the 2008 financial crisis. AKA, he could hire whoever the damn hell he wanted because he was one of the few people still bringing people on. Now, he already suspected that the issue had something to do with speed. So he was recruiting people who knew how the market was structured underneath the hood, how the actual cables were run, and what protocols the network used. One of those hired on was Ronan Ryan, a network expert specializing in low latency connections who had in-depth knowledge of the infrastructure used by high-frequency trading firms. Early on, he explained to Brad how Spread Networks had laid high-speed fiber optic cable between exchanges in Chicago and New York, spending $300 million to save just 3 milliseconds of latency. A light bulb went off in Brad's head. Clearly someone was making a lot more than $300 million to spend that kind of money. And with this new information, they had a theory that high-frequency trading firms were exploiting something that would become known as latency arbitrage.
The 100,000 shares of AMD that I saw on my screen wasn't just at one stock market. There were actually at the time 13 different stock exchanges in the United States that were geographically located in different buildings. Now the geography actually is important here because what that means is that when I see 100,000 shares on my screen and I try to enter an order, me pressing the button once isn't just one action. Me pressing the button once sends one message to something called a smart order router. It splits my order up into as many as 13 different messages and blasts them out to the stock exchanges. This is going to sound crazy, but RBC at the time, we were located in downtown Manhattan. All of the exchanges were in New Jersey, which is west of Manhattan. So what that means is that my one order to buy 100,000 shares of AMD, let's say there's 25,000 shares offered at 4 exchanges. I would blast 4 orders out to the market from RBC, and they would arrive in sequence first at BATS, because BATS is located in Weehawken, New Jersey, right on the other side of the Lincoln Tunnel. It's closest to Manhattan. Then Direct Edge in Secaucus, then NASDAQ and Carteret and the New York Stock Exchange built a new, I heard, they spent close to $1 billion building a data center in Mahwah, New Jersey, and one in Basildon. It would arrive there last. It was 60 miles away from NASDAQ. The difference in time, this is gonna sound completely bananas, was 2 milliseconds between arriving at the first and the last exchange. At the time, I thought that was actually pretty fast. It's 300 milliseconds to blink your eye. 2 milliseconds to me seemed pretty fast, except for the fact that one of the people I hired, this guy by the name of Ronan Ryan, had just come from building out high-frequency trading infrastructure for some of the biggest high-frequency trading firms there were. And he said, I got bad news for you, Brad. I can get from one building, BATS, to the next in 476 microseconds. A microsecond is 1 millionth of a second. He could actually get there 4 times faster than I could, which meant that as my orders were going out to the market, we would arrive at BATS first. Ronan's clients would pick up a signal and race us to Direct Edge, NASDAQ, in New York. And they were doing 2 things. One is they were canceling their sell orders. Now that they know a buyer's come in and bought everything, all of the AMD shares at $291 on BATS, they're racing out to cancel any sell orders they have in the market. But second, they're also trying to buy shares ahead of me to sell back to me at a higher price.
In hindsight, the concept sounds simple, but at the time, it was revolutionary. By leveraging faster data feeds, high-frequency trading firms had gained a billion-dollar edge by using their speed advantage to detect large incoming orders on one exchange and react ahead of those orders on other exchanges. By doing so, they could buy or sell stocks in anticipation, locking in a profit at the expense of slower traders. The best part? This was totally legal. Normally, having advanced information and using it to place trades is known as insider trading, but here, well, there's no regulation for this sort of thing. This tactic essentially granted these firms a near risk-free commission on every trade made by anyone with a slower connection. And the more Brad thought about it, the more disturbed he was by the implications.
When we first discovered latency arbitrage, when I sat at RBC and we tested it out and we figured out that people were racing us back and forth, I'll never forget it. I went home that night and I thought about it. And I said, you know what? There's no way in the world we were the first people to figure this out. I don't think we were 5th or 10th, maybe we were 15th or 20th. Every single person who had figured out that this game could be played by racing between the exchanges figured it out and went to play the game. The quickest way for me and my colleagues to get rich was to go back out there and exploit what we had discovered. The problem is the world's changing. I don't want to be the 15th or the 20th person to do that. You want to be the first person to actually go out there and say, this is the real problem here. The other aspect was that I took my job seriously. The fact that I represented retirements, the fact that I represented pensions, the fact that I actually represented the savings of so many people. Every time I had a trade, I felt like I had a duty to my clients to actually do the right thing. And here all of a sudden you figure